So Princess Peach Showtime has been out for almost a year now. And since its release, it's sold roughly around 1.2 million copies worldwide for the Switch console. And some people feel like that's not really good or that's a pretty low number. And rightfully so, especially for a Nintendo game. But then again, this is Princess Peach we're talking about. And she's not a character that normally gets her own video games where she's like the main protagonist. And this is also considered to be a spin-off game, so I don't think it's necessarily meant to do ridiculous numbers in terms of sales. Now, this is a game that got a mixed reception when it first came out because a lot of people like various things about it, like the way it looked, the soundtrack, the gameplay, the story, all that stuff, but they also thought it was like way too easy. And it's kind of uncertain as to who the game is supposed to appeal to audience wise. Now, people can go on record and say, yeah, this is designed to appeal to children and a family audience and all that other stuff. But you have you have other characters like Mario and Luigi and, Link, who pretty much have a greater appeal than Princess Peach does because they're household names that have been around for a long time. And don't get me wrong, Princess Peach has been around for almost as long as Mario, but she hasn't been playable characters in all the old Mario games, at least like most of the platform games for the most part. And I think the last major game that she got prior to Princess Peach Showtime was Super Princess Peach from 2005, which I think was on Nintendo DS. And that was a game that got overlooked because more people were into Pokemon and all that other stuff back in the mid 2000s. And and I don't know, I feel like this is a game that it has a very intriguing story. The setting, takes place at a theater. But the thing is, like, Princess Peach has like various, different gimmicks where she could transform into like a sword fighter, she could be a ninja, a cowgirl, a detective. All that stuff is like very intriguing. And I feel like it added variety to the game itself. But I feel like it's also one of those things where it felt like Nintendo tried to do too much in one game, and they were just throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall, like a bunch of ideas against the wall and trying to see what sticks. Because you look at like some of the other games that we have like on Nintendo consoles. Like, for example, like the Luigi's Mansion series. It has its own distinctive theme that focuses on one thing. Like Luigi's Mansion is supposed to be Nintendo's version of Ghostbusters, and it's basically just, that theme throughout, within its series. And I feel like the consistency with Luigi's Mansion, just sticking to Luigi, being a ghost fighter and all that stuff is something that has led to the franchise becoming like successful for the most part. And the thing is, like a lot of people felt like Luigi would never get out of Mario's shadow, but the thing is, Nintendo had to start giving Luigi his own game back in the early 2000s, and I feel like more than 20 years later, like Luigi is somewhat out of Mario's shadow, but not really for the most part. And Princess Peach, like when people think about her, they normally see a damsel in distress because you look at like the main Mario games that she's in, that's basically how she's portrayed. The only time she's portrayed in a different light outside of her own video game series is when she's like featured in the Mario Kart games or the Mario Party games, where just about every character in those games are pretty much doing the same thing. Princess Peach Showtime, I feel like, is one of those games where Peach really got to shine as a protagonist. And honestly, the game is actually pretty solid. And and you look at Metacritic, I believe the game got like somewhere around the ballpark of like a 73 or a 74. It's passable, it got a passable Metascore, but the user score was like 6.8 or something like that. It was below a 70. So some people feel like the game is slightly overrated, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure people will go on record and tell you that Princess Peach Showtime is more impressive than they initially thought it would be. And I'm not exactly sure whether or not you would label this game a success or a failure because I feel like doing 1.2 million copies in sales is pretty good, especially for a Princess Peach game, and especially considering the fact that Princess Peach hasn't had her own main video game since 2005. I think this is actually pretty decent, but you look at 2024, Nintendo didn't have a lot of high profile video games that came out that year other than Super Mario Party Jamboree. And I think we also got Zelda Echoes of Wisdom last year as well, where Zelda was like the main playable character for like the first time in the entire franchise. And I don't remember how that game did, but I wouldn't be shocked if it didn't do any better than this game in terms of overall sales. And not to say that that's a bad game either. It's just that you know, we don't see Princess Peach or Princess Zelda as main characters in video games very often. And they're normally portrayed as damsels in distress. And I feel like that's something that may have harmed their credibility in terms of people perceiving them as main protagonists within video games. And and I don't know, maybe it's a route that Nintendo probably should have taken a lot sooner, should have focused on in the past. But the thing is, you look at characters like Mario and Link, they've been big attractions for decades, and Nintendo hasn't really strayed far from keeping those two characters as as main attractions within the video games and as like main protagonists and all that stuff because if it's not broken don't fix it, you just take the same formula, you recycle it, you make some tweaks and you make a ton of money off it. And that's what Nintendo's been really good at doing for decades. And they're obviously doing something right because it seems like when it comes down to their main installments within the Mario and the Zelda series, every video game seems to be better than the last in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not exactly sure whether or not Nintendo has any plans on doing that with Princess Peach and her spin-off series or with Zelda Echoes of Wisdom in terms of possibly giving it a sequel or developing a spin-off series based off of, that game or whatever. But but yeah, Princess Peach Showtime. Um I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that it was a complete failure because it at least did 1 mil in terms of sales, and it was actually a pretty good game, but I feel like it's something that caters more to a niche audience. It doesn't have the casual appeal as some of the other Nintendo games have, and, and yet I feel like that's something that's rather unfortunate, but, 2024 in general was not necessarily, a very great year for like gaming. It wasn't on the same level as 2023, but I feel like it was better than 2022 and probably even better than 2021 to some extent. But but yeah, I wouldn't say this game and this is necessarily a flop. I mean, if it did over a mil, then I feel like that's decent, especially in this day and age, because a lot of video games seem to have trouble breaking 3 or 4 mil these days. And I do feel that Princess Peach shines more as a side character in video games featuring, guys like Mario and Luigi and whatever, whether it be Mario Kart or whether it be any of the Mario Party games. But but yeah, I feel like, this game, if this came out maybe in like 2022, it probably would have ended up doing better than it did since that was kind of a weak year for Nintendo as well. Um, as far as this past year is concerned, I feel like this game probably should have sold more than it did, considering how much it was hyped. I remember when I first watched a trailer for Princess Peach Showtime. I believe I made a video or I wrote something where I said it looks promising and it looked like it could be really big if it was done right. And honestly, it surpassing 1 million in terms of sales, actually surprised me to be quite honest. So I wouldn't say the game is a complete flop, but at the same time, it probably should have ended up selling more than it did, considering the fact that Nintendo didn't have too many high profile games that came out back in 2024.